Iraq's Shia militias have a controversial record. Now the government says it wants to make them part of the official armed forces. Can the state control them, though? Where do their loyalties lie? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Although they've been accused of widespread human rights abuses, the popular mobilization units, or Shia militias, have become a crucial part of the Iraqi government's anti-ISIL strategy. Now, Prime Minister Al-Dabbagh wants to integrate them into the national armed forces. It's a move, he says, will make them subject to military law and will ban them from having any political affiliations. But the militias have strong political ties in Iraq. They emerged in 2014 after a call from leading Shia cleric Ali Sistani for Iraqis to join the fight against ISIL. The fighters are mostly Shia Muslims, many of them supported by the Iranian government. They've been at the front line of government efforts to rid Iraq's towns and cities of ISIL fighters. They're also accused of attacking Sunni civilians after recapturing territory from ISIL. And there are concerns integrating them into the army will do little to ease sectarian tensions in the country. Let's bring in the thoughts of our guests now. We have joining us from London, Sabah Al-Mukhtar, President of the Arab Lawyers Association. In Washington, D.C., Kenneth Katzman, Senior Analyst at the Congressional Research Service. And in Dubai via Skype, Al-Dabbagh, former spokesman for the Iraqi government. Welcome to you all. So let's start with Sabah. Is this good news? Apparently they're going to be made accountable under military law, end political affiliations. Is this really a case of the state taking over militias, or is it the militias taking over the state in disguise? How do you see it?
I think it's useful for the viewers to know that there is a fighting for the power centers. We have the Maliki and some of the militias. We have Abadi, who has no militias. We have Muqtada al-Sadr, who is in control of Baghdad or certain areas. There is this conflict between these three powers. I think the idea that somehow we integrate this, Abadi is trying to give the impression that he has some backing with the army. He's scaring Muqtada al-Sadr with that. But in terms of what he has done, I don't think it's going to make anything better. This is a militia which has been condemned.
Let me just jump in there. According to, I think it's called Office Order 91, that's the whole point of this, is to end their affiliations with political parties.
Absolutely. I have a copy of it, and he has relied on the Article 78 of the Constitution, which makes him the commander of the armed forces. However, Article 9 of the Constitution says there should be no militias outside the armed forces. And the Hashd al-Shabi, or the mobilization force, has been there since 2014. So it's an illegal thing. Now, even the decision which he has made, I think there are questions about the constitutionality of that one. It is probably illegal what he's trying to do. Nevertheless, it's sending a signal, especially to Muqtada al-Sadr, that I have some force which is going to come on my side. And I think this is a struggle for power between the three centers on that one. As far as control is concerned, I think there is zero control. These militias are sectarian militias. They are backed by the Iranians. They are controlled by Qasimi Soleimani and the leaders of the various militias. There are almost, the main ones are 45 militias, and their allegiance is not a national one, but more of a sectarian one and an Iranian one.
All right, let's go over to get the view from Ali. Does Sabah have a point when he talks about the allegiance of these militias? Because when you pay a little more detail, perhaps to some of the, a little more attention, I should say, to the detail in Office Order 91, which is basically what is codifying these popular mobilization units as a separate security entity, it does look like they're outside the military chain of command, correct?
Listen, there is a great challenge against Haider al-Abadi, how to deal with those groups in the volunteers in the what is so-called mobilization unit. Majority of the mobilization, they are volunteers which they come to defend the problem and the crisis arises from the entry of ISIS in Iraq. But again, the higher voice is for those militias, which is right as you said, backed by the Iranians, and they are multi-militias. It's not only one monolithic group. They are more than 10 groups, 10 major groups, which they are not loyal to Haider al-Abadi and his government. And
that's my question, though. But this Office Order 91, as it's called, though, does it change anything that you've just described if they're not under the military chain of command, Ali?
Yeah, that is what Haider al-Abadi tried to give to the Iraqis as well as to the others, that he is trying to accommodate those people and to find. But no one in Iraq believed that Haider al-Abadi could succeed in having those groups and those militias. They are going to be loyal to the Iraqi military forces. They are going to be multi-groups inside the Iraqi forces. And this is not the concern of the Sunni in Iraq, it's the concern of the Shia, because at the end, those people, they are going to go back to the governorate, which they are again going to threat the stability of this region. So, but Haider al-Abadi have no choice now, have no choice only to depend on those mobilization unit and those militias in order to fight Daesh. The Iraqi military forces is not enough, is not so qualified 100% to defeat Mosul and to liberate Mosul. He do need to have ground forces beside Peshmerga, which is, he found that the only group available is those militias, which at the end he's in a balance to control them and in a balance to make use of them and to reuse them in order to liberate Mosul.
All right, making use of them and using them. Kenneth, when I think about those words which Ali is saying, I'm still left with the question of how Haider al-Abadi, you know, who's using who here if they're on paper supposed to be reporting to him, but in reality they have multiple allegiances to political parties, even to states like Iran beyond the borders of Iraq?
Thank you. And of course, I'm appearing today in a capacity as an expert, not speaking for the Congressional Research Service or anything. You know, it's very difficult to say. I think Abadi is trying to get control of the militias for the reasons the other guests spoke about, which is to try to marginalize Maliki and marginalize Hadi al-Amiri and maybe marginalize Mr. Mohandas and Qais Ghazali, the other militia commanders. But, you know, of course, I'm a U.S. expert, and I have to think how this affects the U.S. campaign, the U.S. assistance to Iraq. And, you know, obviously the U.S. has had tremendous problems with the Shia militias. The U.S. has tried to get Abadi to keep the militias out of the battle, particularly in the Sunni areas, because the Sunni in Iraq they don't trust these militias. These militias, like was said, are loyal to the Qasem Soleimani, Iran, Shia partisans. And,
has that initial U.S. position changed, though, Kenneth? Perhaps there was some opposition from the U.S. initially, but it does seem like the Americans, for one reason or another, have practically de facto given in to an awkward or very unusual situation where they're backing forces supplied and trained by Iran.
Well, there was an evolution. There was a modification. The U.S. at one point said the U.S. could give assistance to the militias that were not commanded by Iran. So that was the stipulation. So that kept some of the militias out of getting U.S. assistance, like the Badr organization and like Katib Hezbollah, which the U.S. actually declares as a terrorist group. Katib al-Hezbollah is named as a terrorist group by the United States. So if that group and some of these other groups are brought into the security apparatus, that could tremendously complicate the U.S. ability to assist the Iraq security forces, because you know, there's going to be a lot of political, I think, questions and criticism if the U.S. starts helping the Iraqis and they have these Shia militias who the U.S., some of them is declared as terrorist groups, that would be, Case Ghazali, for example, he killed, his group killed 5 Americans in Karbala in 2005, I think. So to be supporting groups loyal to these men is going to be, I think, very difficult for the United States.
Well, on another point, Sabah, I mean, one of the major concerns that have been flagged about some of these militias is their human rights record. Whether you listen to the recent statements by the UN Human Rights Chief, who only on July the 5th cited continuing abuses by the Popular Mobilization Front, or whether you look back to Amnesty International's report in October 2014 citing human rights abuses against the Sunni population, there does seem to be a continuing trend of allegations of abuse against these militias. Will any of that change now that they're officially part of the Iraqi military structure, according to this decree at least?
First of all, I don't think it's going to happen. This is what Abadi is trying to do. He wanted to change the Council of Ministers. He couldn't. He issued decisions on the Prime Minister, on the Deputy Prime Minister and Vice Presidents, and he couldn't carry it out. This is another one of these things. But what he is trying to do, he's attempting to circumvent the U.S. position, because it said we will not have the mobilization force to be part of the attack on Mosul. He is now incorporating them within the army, or trying to. However, I don't think he will be able to do that. But if one looks, which the issue you made at the beginning is that how does this decision which he made is going to be implemented? In that one, I think the last paragraph of that decision, it says that it's only those who are going to renounce their alliance to a party or to a political movement who will be incorporated. Now, I don't think he will be able to do that. Nevertheless, in terms of the abuse of human rights, it's not a matter of being reported or it is the human rights organizations. On the ground, and this is what the media and particularly the USA is trying to do, it is talking about liberation from ISIS. In fact, what is happening is the destruction. We have at the present moment at least 10 cities in Iraq that has been destroyed, but it is still referred to as liberated from ISIS, which is really a way that it's going to haunt the others in the future, just as much as the Americans created the Al-Qaeda to fight the Russians, only to turn around. We all remember Al-Qaeda when they were met at the Oval Office by President Reagan. Now they are fighting the Americans. These militias are going to do exactly the same thing if they continue to get the support. And in fact, we in Europe now are suffering from some of them who have come from Iraq, and now they are practicing terrorism in Europe, whether in France or Belgium or any of the countries in Europe. I think this is a misguided move. I don't think it will happen. I think it tries to give it the impression that it is doing something right, but it can't and it won't.
All right, I'm not sure some of the Sabah, the detail there of those. Could you clarify what you mean by those who've come from Iraq who are causing? I can see Kenneth is actually shaking his head on this point. Let me give Kenneth a chance to come back in.
Well, your guest mentioned that Al-Qaeda met in the White House. No, there was some Afghan lead Mujahideen that met in the White House with President Reagan, perhaps even Mr. Haqqani. But Al-Qaeda meeting in the White House, I don't think so. I don't think that happened. But I agree with the thrust of what's being said, though, is that it's going to be very difficult to have a successful operation in Mosul that stabilizes Mosul. Obviously, if the Hashd-e-Shabi, if the PMF contribute to the battle, maybe they could sweep the Islamic State out of Mosul. Yes, maybe. But the issue is then stabilizing Mosul and getting the citizens, and particularly, obviously, it's mostly Sunnah, to come back and live in Mosul and stay in Mosul. If it's all the Hashd-e-Shabi, is going to be very difficult to stabilize Mosul after the Islamic State is expelled from there.
Right. Well, that takes us to a point, actually, which is mentioned in this Order 91, which talks about these popular mobilization forces, Ali, being cut off from all political and party frameworks. I guess the idea is to present the image to Iraqis that this is a non-sectarian, you know, a national, becoming part of a national force that represents all Iraqis rather than sectarian Shiite representatives of sectarian Shiite political parties. Really, can that be done, do you think, when many of these factions were established per se as the military wings of some of these Shiite political parties? The Ashura brigades came out of the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq. Saraya as-Salam came out of the Sadrist movement. The Badr Corps came out of the Badr organization political parties. I mean, can you really see a scenario in which they are told, cut your links with these parties? I mean, they're more powerful, some would argue, than even the Prime Minister, are they not?
Yeah, again, the challenge that if Ibadi is able to spread those people, not to keep them as a block in the military, they act as a block, as a consistent block, different blocks. Yes, there is a big threat for the whole political process. There is a big threat for everybody. They are going to be multi-groups inside the military forces. But if Ibadi, and I don't know, nobody could guarantee that Ibadi could do that. If he could spread them and he mixing them in a different way and keep them and spread them in different units among the military forces, yes. But again,
where will their funding come from going forward, Ali, do you think? I mean, a lot of their funding comes from political parties, from the Sadrist movement, from Iran. I mean, can that change just because of an order on paper?
Let me just confirm, Iran is not paying a single fils to those people. Iraqi government is paying their payroll. More than 100,000 people Iraqi is funding them. Iraqi government is funding. Iran is not even the weapons and the equipment they are selling. Iran selling to them, and they are getting money out of it. So Iran participate heavily in defending Erbil and defending Baghdad. And defending. But just to give an example of your guest in Washington, but give me 1 minute, please.
Sure. We'll come to Kenneth in a second because I think he's shaking his head. But go ahead now, Ali.
Yes, just commenting on Kenneth that he said Mosul, stabilizing of Mosul is not the responsibility of the popular Al-Hajj al-Sha'bi. Like what in Tikrit, it has been liberated, and the national forces and the police, local police, the same as in Fallujah. Popular mobilization, nothing to do. They should leave, and this is what they prove. In Tikrit, they left, and in Fallujah also left. So in Mosul, the same thing going to happen.
But Ali, wasn't there, in the wake of their departure, human rights groups have been complaining of abuses and impunity? I mean, like I mentioned, the human rights chief only a matter of days ago was talking about the case of 643 Sunni missing men and boys, reports of 49 others having been allegedly tortured and executed. I mean, that is a stability problem that you're left with when these militias Sami, enter into Sunni areas, right?
You are right. You are right, definitely right. There is abuses of the human rights, but don't forget that there is a revenge from the tribes also. You could see that there were many cases that then those which they are participated in ISIS, they've been hanged. And they've been hanged on an electrical pole in Fallujah. There is going to be revenge, and that revenge, I don't deny that there is abuse of the human rights, and definitely Ibadi needs to take a more measure than what is taken in Fallujah while operating in Mosul.
All right, let me give a chance to Kenneth because I could see you wanted to come back in there on a few points. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, Iran is not selling weaponry to the militia. Iran is giving them weaponry. And this is part of the issue because Iran, actually, the Hashd al-Sha'bi, they were demanding a bigger share of the national budget. They wanted the official government budget to be funding them. Originally, they started 2014. They were funded by their organizations like the Sadrist, the Badr, the parties, but then they wanted to get the government budget, and they started getting the government budget. This is what Iran wants. They want the Iraqi government to give money to the militias, and then they would pay Iran for the weapons. So Iran doesn't have to just keep donating the weaponry to them. It's all part of an effort. You know, Iran is trying to get more control in Iraq, and it's doing that through these militias and Hashd al-Sha'bi. I mean, the introduction
Kenneth, what would you make perhaps of Ali's
started
argument that the Prime Minister really doesn't have any other option, and maybe he can play this kind of chess game and play them all off against each other, and somehow the argument goes he will emerge as perhaps the strongest player? Is that wishful thinking, or you think that's...
Well, that's what he's trying to do. He's, like I said in my other end, he's trying to marginalize Hadi Amiri and Mohandas and Qais Ghazali, but these guys have a lot of support among the Shia people in the street, and I think Abadi's going to have a very difficult time playing that game successfully.
All right, Sabah, I mean, Kenneth has kind of opened the discussion here to talk about the Iranian influence in Iraq. Let's not beat around the bush. I mean, how will militias be loyal to Haider al-Abadi or even the state when you have leaders declaring on television channels like Sumariya TV on November the 4th, leaders of some of these popular mobilization front units like Akram al-Ka'bi, the Secretary General of Harakat al-Nujaba, saying things like, quote, "The Iraqi system of governance doesn't meet our ambitions, it's secular, and if a religious authority decides we'll go ahead, and it'll be normal for us to implement," quote, what he called a coup. We can't stage a coup, he says, unless a religious authority makes a decision to change that. And he goes on in another television station to say in November the 7th that his militia takes guidance from Khamenei in Iran. That's a real problem, isn't it?
Oh, it is, absolutely. And I think any discussion about them changing their color or their allegiance is misplaced, because many of these organizations, in fact, started in Iran, and the US occupation knows that. But they made the mistake by thinking that some of them are not Iranians, and then after that, things slipped from their hands. And now we look at the picture, and the US occupation have handed Iraq to Iran, which is very difficult for the Iraqis to understand how or why it happened. Those people are hell-bent on supporting Iran. And it doesn't matter whether one looks at them as being Shiites or not Shia. There is an allegiance. This is not a religious thing. This is more of an allegiance to another country. You may share with them the sect or the religion or whatever, but actually these militias are Iranian. Some of them were Iranian created. Some of them are Iranian backed. But all of them, almost all of them, are controlled. We have Qasem Soleimani. Officially, he's the advisor to the Iraqi government on that issue.
All right. Well, you've touched on this, Kenneth. If I can come back to you for a brief comment on this. How will the US going forward, do you think US policy will proceed if now these popular mobilization front units are formally part of the military? They include people like Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the operational commander of the PMF, who is on, since July 2009, a US special designated global terrorist list, includes organizations that have fought the Americans, includes organizations like Kataib Hezbollah, designated as US terrorists, and so on and so forth. Do you think the Americans are going to rethink or just go along?
Well, I think it depends how Abadi implements this order. That's the thing. I mean, I think the order said that this force, they'll be integrated alongside or the equivalent of like the counterterrorism forces. I believe the order said that. So it could be that these militias are integrated into one separate structure. And if that happens, the U.S. could perhaps say, okay, we're not working with that group because it's got too many militias and Kataib Hezbollah and is involved, so we won't work with that. If they're integrated into the great mass of the ISF, the Iraq
But the reality is,
forces,
Kenneth, everyone knows and has seen the pictures. American weapons are ending up in the hands of these militias, which are loyal to Iran, and some of them are on the bad boy list by Washington.
Look, I mean, yes, we talked about it. The U.S. has made adjustments and maybe downplayed some of this stuff, but
Right.
when these militias come into the ISF, there's probably going to be more criticism from U.S.
Right.
political speakers here about working with them.
Well, I'm sure we'll be back to talk about this, although time is out now. I'm sure, gentlemen, we'll be talking about this issue again, as well as others in Iraq. For now, let's thank our guests very much, Ali Al-Dabbagh, Sabah Al-Mukhtar, and Kenneth Katzman. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website. For further discussion, you can also head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or join the conversation on Twitter, handle there @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here. For now, it's goodbye.